emaciated men with a look of despair in their eyes stare into the camera lens. This photograph was taken by photographer Sergei Prokudin-Gorsky in the early 20th century in one of the most notorious prisons in Central Asia, the Bukhara Zindan. Prisoners here were held in appalling conditions, and escape was impossible. The prison was built in such a way that escape was truly impossible. At least, there are no recorded cases or written sources indicating that any prisoners ever escaped. In the East, a zindan referred to a traditional underground dungeon. It appeared in the late 18th century in the Uzbek city of Bukhara, near the ancient Ark fortress, during the reign of the Manghit dynasty. Before the zindan, there was a cemetery on this site. In the 18th century, the cemetery was relocated and the zindan was constructed. Built on the site of ancient burials, the prison became one of the largest zindans in the Bukhara Emirate. The zindan primarily held debtors and violators of religious laws. The prison itself could accommodate no more than 40 people, indicating that the crime rate in Bukhara was relatively low at the time. The prison building resembles an impregnable fortress. High ceramic brick walls separated the criminal prisoners from the outside world. Entry to the zindan was through this arch with wooden doors. Behind them were several structures where the prisoners were held. An interesting detail, the roofs of the prison cells are dome-shaped. This architecture was common throughout Central Asia, where domes were built in Muslim countries. If they were built in markets, it was to create a cool atmosphere. In the prison, they were built to allow light to enter only from above. This is how Soviet artist Lev Bure depicted the Bukhara Zindan. He divided the painting into two parts. In the upper part, prisoners sit in a relatively spacious cell, where a beam of light falls through an opening in the roof. In the lower part, prisoners, like in a hellish cauldron, languish in a cramped, dark pit. This unusual prison design was the main feature of the Bukhara Zindan. The zindan consists of two parts: the zindan bolo, upper zindan, and the zindan poyan, lower zindan. The upper zindan consists of several courtyards and rooms with prisoners. Twice a month, prisoners were taken barefoot and chained together to the square. Prisoners were held in inhumane conditions, and many did not even know the length of their sentence. In summer, inmates of the Bukhara prison did not know how to escape the heat. Sometimes there was not enough space in the cells, and prisoners had to sit outside under the scorching sun. When it got cold, they began to freeze, as the prison rooms were not heated. However, prisoners were not forbidden from starting a fire in their cell to warm up a little. Prisoners were fed only once a day. They received a stale flatbread and some water from a ditch. Occasionally, relatives or city residents would bring food to the prisoners. Such cases also occurred. Two cells in the upper part of the zindan were designated for debtors. This included those who owed money to the state, such as tax evaders, and those who had not repaid debts to other individuals. This is the debt cell, the largest inside the zindan. There is another room inside. Here are the original shackles. Someone borrowed money from someone else and did not repay it on time. The entrance and exit were from below. It was cleverly designed for the prisoners. Inmates could be released from the debt cell after 6 months. However, this was only possible if the prisoner was lucky enough to have relatives who took on the obligation to repay all debts. Otherwise, the term of confinement could stretch for years. They remained here until they paid off their debts. That is, they worked on crafts here, gradually paying off their debts and being released. If a prisoner did not possess a craft, they were sent to work off their debt on the construction of some building in Bukhara. But wherever the prisoners were taken to work in the city or for a walk in the zindan courtyard, they were always shackled. These are shackles for the neck and hands. Separate leg shackles were also used to chain prisoners together. In this state, they were taken outside the prison or into the zindan territory and walked around. This was to prevent them from escaping. People who violated religious norms were held in even worse conditions in the zindan. In the Bukhara Emirate, this was considered a serious offense. One could be sent to prison even for missing the namaz prayer. A special official, the Rais, monitored compliance with religious laws. Every morning, he visited the parish mosque in one of the city quarters and asked the imam if all men had attended the first pre-dawn prayer. If someone from that quarter was absent, they would go to their house. If there was no valid reason for missing the namaz, and this repeated 2 or 3 times in a row, the person could be punished with a flogging or imprisoned in the zindan. For incorrigible criminals, in the eyes of the authorities, a particularly dreadful place was reserved in the Bukhara prison. For those who committed dangerous crimes, there was an underground room in the zindan. However, it is hard to call it a room. It more closely resembles a deep pit. Its diameter is 5 meters, and its depth is 6.5 meters. Prisoners were lowered into it on a rope. Food was delivered to them in the same manner. This deep pit was called the Kona in the zindan, which translates to bug pit. The walls and floor of the underground cell were infested with disgusting insects. They were specifically bred to torture the prisoners. From bedbug bites, there was almost no living skin left on the prisoners' bodies. 6 to 14 people could be in the pit at the same time. 3 types of prisoners were held here. The first were those guilty of blasphemy. The second type were multiple murderers. The third type were political prisoners. Those who opposed the emir were placed in this room. Unlike debtors, those thrown into the bug pit were not taken for walks. The term of confinement in the pit depended on the behavior of the prisoners themselves. However, the prisoners' relatives could expedite their release or at least achieve a reduction in punishment. To do this, they had to bribe the zindan's chief, the qazi, which was not always successful. Naturally, no one wanted to end up in the bug pit or prison. Perhaps it was precisely because of this fear that crime rates were low. Criminals sentenced to the death penalty were also sent to the Bukhara Zindan. However, executions were not carried out within the prison walls. Near the fortress is a square called Registan Square. All punishments and executions took place in this square. In the mid-19th century, 2 foreign prisoners of the Bukhara Zindan, English spy Arthur Conolly and his colleague Colonel Charles Stoddart, were beheaded in Registan Square. They were sent to Bukhara to persuade the local emir, Nasrullah, to sign a friendship treaty with Great Britain, but the mission failed. Both Englishmen were accused of espionage and thrown into the bug pit. Negotiations between the Bukhara Emirate and Great Britain failed, and by order of Emir Nasrullah Khan, they were executed in front of the Ark on Registan Square. Criminals were often flogged with a wide whip on this same square. This punishment was even worse than beheading. Mostly thieves and state traitors were sentenced to it. The punishment of flogging was widespread in the state and could reach up to 300 strokes. This was a very severe form of punishment, and few survived such punishments. For disobedience, prisoners could also be struck with a kalpak-cha, a wooden club carried by prison guards. The Bukhara Zindan was closed after the revolution and the fall of the monarchy in the 1920s. Today, a museum operates within the walls of the former dungeon. Instead of prisoners, there are mannequins in the cells, and behind glass and display cases are instruments of punishment. In the prison courtyard, there is a symbolic grave of Kuchkar-Ata, the patron saint of prisoners. The Bukhara Zindan building is included in the UNESCO World Heritage List. What do you think about it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your opinion is very important to me. Don't forget to give me a like if you liked it and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new episodes. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.